I think this one is working. I think it's quite an intimate crowd, so I'm just going to say a few words to introduce Rob and say thank you ever so much for coming to the AA. When Rob first proposed the piece that's outside now, we were a bit worried because he described it as an exploded car. We were thinking, how are we going to get that one past Camden Council? But we did. We used the word fragmented, actually, in our application to Camden, which worked fine. And it's been really nice having something outside that people have been interacting with. And I think we were talking today, in its short life, it's already been a place to drink and a place to eat. It's been a venue for a blind date, and it's been a photo booth. So it's been really nice seeing people using it in different ways. Although Rob found a hypodermic needle today, which wasn't so great. We didn't intend that use. That wasn't in the Arts Council application, so no more of that. It's been really nice seeing his strange, slightly malevolent work in the gallery. It's such a joy to see something that's slightly scary rather than these very glossy proposed mixed-use utopias that we're all meant to be buying into, where everyone looks very shiny and happy. It's been nice seeing something slightly scary, which is funny because Rob himself is actually very nice, very gentle. Even though he's a proponent of evil architecture, he had to do a workshop at Berlin recently, a very big show he had at the Gallery 2YK. He did a workshop with architecture students, and his brief to them was to come up with an evil building, which I just love the idea of, and I think you're going to talk about the evil buildings they came up with. Because I think although here at the AA, quite often evil buildings are the result, I don't think anyone ever tells people to come up with them. So I'll introduce everyone now to Rob, who's a very nice proponent of evil architecture. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you. Which one shall I use? This one? All right. Okay. Thank you very much for coming along. I'll introduce myself briefly. I studied sculpture in a small place called Kampen in Holland. I graduated in 1996. Since then I've been working on sculptures, and since like 6 years also on printmaking. During the lecture I will show you some of my works, tell you about how I what my intentions were, my fascinations, and how I work, and how much work changed during the last few years. If you have questions, you can always interrupt me and ask me. So don't hesitate or feel well, how do you say it? Feel shy. Okay, we can go to the first image. No, the images. Yeah. Okay. Just a space. All right. Okay. What fascinates me are two types of buildings. Buildings that are destroyed, or buildings that are being built. I kind of like the roughness of it, and also the kind of clearness, openness. Like it sort of invites it to be expanded, to add other elements to it. This is Montevideo. That's the largest building in Holland so far. It relates to my work also in a way, and I come from Holland, and I think Holland really influenced me in a way that Holland is very over-organized, more than Britain. Dutch people can't stand decay. If a building starts deteriorating a bit, then it either have to be torn down completely or restored in a way as if it looks like a building from a suburb, a newly built building. So I grew up in that environment, and since a child I was already interested in how the environment's being used, how it could be used better. I studied 1 year landscape and garden architecture. Also, from that motivation of, you've got spare spaces in city people hardly use, like fields and I think it's stupid not to do something with that or try to think about it in another way. This is a house in Hackney. I started, when I graduated, I was mainly sculpture, but in 1999 I started making my first print. This is not my first print, but my first print was kind of a space module built from planks. It was a small linoleum print, and since then these prints became a substantial part of my work apart from my sculpture. After I made this print, I kind of start thinking, why did I make this print, or why does it fascinate me? This kind of sheds. In Holland, the only kind of really spontaneous way of building you can see on farms or in communal gardens, these sort of improvised huts made of doors and planks and so on. And again, I was fascinated by it because it was so un-Dutch, it was so shabby, improvised. And since then I made more prints, and all these prints, they have a kind of duality. They have this kind of archaic quality, but on the other hand, you see shapes in it that derives from machines or modern architecture. This, for example, you can it slightly remembers you of a copier machine. The title is also called Brother, and I also made a sculpture of this one. I even sent a few images to the company Brother with a letter if they were interested in purchasing some works, but I got a really nice letter back and a very subtle remark that, well, they thanked me for it, but they didn't think it reflects their products. I still have the letter. I really enjoyed it. This is another sculpture I made at the time from 2000. It's also called Brother. It's kind of a three-dimensional interpretation. There's a kind of a shelter built inside with a mattress. And it's one of the first works which kind of have the idea that you can sort of use it. And the thing is with printmaking, you can make really big sort of grand images of worlds, whereas sculptures, you can actually use them and they're really materialized. And I kind of like to show a whole world in an exhibition. Also in this exhibition you can see sculptures and prints, so you get all kinds of layers to look at. This is also a work called Print Center. It's also like a kind of a machine with a living unit in it, and with a sort of wood burning inside and sort of burnt paper coming out, burnt prints. Most of the works, they're kind of seems to fall apart or burn itself or falling down by gravity. And I kind of like to work at the time to work with this tension between technology and this archaic way of building, and I think it sort of goes with it. That it's not slightly working; it's sort of falling apart. This piece I did, quite early piece in Peckham, behind Peckham Library, the Old Timber Yacht. It's like a space module made of doors and planks. Inside it was completely covered with blackboard paint. There was a small stairway going up to the aerial dish, so people can stick their head out, and there we're in a garden. It's like a sort of rural remembrance just falling out of the sky in London. I didn't kind of like the environment. I tried to build it in a very slick environment like Canary Wharf or something, but I couldn't get permission for that. This was the only opportunity to build it. I don't have the image with me, but I made a Photoshop big photo of an assembling room in Holland where they assemble satellites, and I photoshopped this work in it. I sort of photoshopped the satellite away and I put this in it. So you have these people in white clothes working on this piece in a very dust-free environment, and I sort of wanted to make one piece that was kind of a ideal place for it. Kids loved it. This is a piece I did a couple of years ago. I did a workshop in Canada with blueprints. I won a printmaking prize, and I was invited to go there and do this workshop. And I really like the quality of the lines, the print, sort of bluish color, bluish purple color. But the only thing with blueprint, I don't think you work with blueprint anymore, but I think they're absolutely beautiful. The only thing with blueprint is that it under ultraviolet light it deteriorates. After a couple of years you hardly see the image anymore. So I tried to change it into silkscreen, try to copy it, and after a while I succeeded and tried to implement it, try to use it in my printmaking, my linoleum print. No, we know this one. This is in the show. This is another print, and this is a combination between linoleum print and silkscreen. I can tell you a little bit about how I make these prints. I first print the linoleum print on paper. Linoleum print works with a negative image, so I start with that, and then I have that printed on paper, and then I put it on the ground, and with plastic sheet I can draw the silkscreen part, which later gets lighted on film, and then can be printed. Silkscreen is not in negative, so I can easily work just around the image of the linoleum print and complete the image. This is not an arc. Lots of people see it as an arc, but if you look closely, it's a Hewlett Packard copier printer machine. This is another piece called Worldviews. I applied for a residency a couple of years ago in 2001 in New York. This residency program was based in the Twin Towers, in one of the towers on the 92nd floor. And my slides were in the towers just before the application when the 9/11 attacks took place. So it's a residency which never happened. I kind of wanted to make one image with this view out of the towers as if, as if I've been there. And you see all these planks the towers being made of, and it's kind of the disaster is sort of incorporated already in those towers. This is a piece I made here in London a couple of years ago. It's called Bad Habits. It's a bar and also the entrance of a group show at that time in Cell Project Space in Cambridge Heath Road. And it's triggered by a sense of that I feel lost in the couple of years that society is getting more frightened. You get more and more restrictions. You can't do this, you can't do that. Smoking is dangerous, so you can't smoke. Well, next year you have the smoking ban here in Britain too, and so every time you hear something new that's dangerous, and it really irritates me. And I kind of wanted to make a space where the outside space actually goes through the inside space. It's a really physical way. So I made all these shafts going through this building, so that inside you get a very claustrophobic space, especially if there's a lot of people in it. It's quite unpractical. That's why it's called Bad Habit. Here you can smoke and drink as much if you like. So in most of my sculptures lately, ashtray appears as a sort of symbol of freedom for me. This is the work you see here. I don't know, maybe most of you have read something about it already. I studied landscape and garden architecture, as I said, and one of my motivations was to change the public space, or to improve it in a way. I had all kinds of ideas. One of them was a sort of elderly home. In my place, you have an elderly home with grass around it. It's completely not used, and I thought, well, if you make communal gardens around this elderly home, you get a very logical, a very simple way of letting people interact in a way. You know, people grow vegetables, and old people hang over their balcony and say, what you're growing there, and then, yeah, you want to have some. And in Holland, everything is so cut off. You don't see any burials anymore. You don't see when someone's dying, or it's all being pushed away. And that's kind of a motivation for this work too. I was invited to respond to the changes on the countryside in Holland, a specific place. Some architectural bureaus were invited, some artists were invited. And I came across to this elderly home, which was situated above the cafe, restaurant in that little village. And it was very clever done. The people from the elderly home, they could mingle downstairs with the locals, and the other way around. And that sort of brought me to this idea to make a sort of grotesque version of this way of letting people mingle, and let animals mingle also, because it's a pig farm, and you can actually see the pigs inside. Also some cutouts in the concrete. You don't smell them, you don't hear them, but you can see them. the cows, they can go also through the building to the other side of the field, among the restaurant, along the restaurant, sorry. So it's quite fun to make. It was, I really enjoyed it, and yeah, for me it's a way of coping with society also, with with some irritations. And I kind of like it being built, but I don't think health and safety is going to prove it. But I'd like to, I've made this piece outside. I think it's, for me, it's a start. I kind of like to make buildings that are being used 24 hours a day, maybe for a short period of time, but with all kinds of functions in it. Also functions that you normally don't want or think could be next to each other. So in a way I would like to, yeah. What do you mean? Yeah, I know. I did recently a sculpture in Newcastle outside, and you have to take into account that. But my answer is yes. Yeah. Yeah. Just going to show you some images from buildings that interest me and also slightly influence me, not directly, but maybe more on an unconscious level. There's a lot of brutalist buildings also here in London. This is near, you probably all know it. It's near Blackwell Tunnel. There's a big complex. It's called the, I don't know, maybe some of you know, a tower, Belflon Tower, that's it. And I kind of like this sort of inwardness of them, and the sort of clearness of connections. These corridors, they're really unfriendly looking, but they're really. I'm a sculptor, so they're for me they are really sculptural, and from the outside they show really what kind of functions each part of the building could have. Well, the bathroom tower. This is a tower in Newcastle. See, it's not really inviting, but but I think you can imagine why it interests me, or if you see my work. This is parking in Gateshead near Newcastle. It's really a fantastic building. You can see it all the way from the city of Newcastle. It's on top of a hill. And you see this sort of clearness of how it's being set up. And it's almost like a bunker. I think with Michael Caine, he played in it. Huh? Yeah, it's been filmed there. Yeah, partially. Yeah. Newcastle people are still very proud of that. This too. I mean, sculpture. It's really beautiful. this is in my town where I live. Ben van Berkel is building their train and bus terminal. And this too, it's got some inwardness, some really unfriendly, but it's interesting. It's a bit intimidating, but it's fascinating. In recent years, in last 2 years now, you all know that probably. I try to combine this kind of inwardness, this kind of unfriendly, uninviting, intimidating character with a sort of grandness, sort of decorativeness, almost like Art Deco, like these sort of hippie communities who make these buildings in forests very over decorated with wood carving and so on. It's like I'm sort of trying to make a sort of architecture which doesn't exist, which sort of you kind of see a group of people that's been fled from society and they started building a new life, or even take over parts of society after it's been deserted. You see this bar, it's like a building, it's been taken over. It's like it's very violent also, kind of like a fireball bursting out of it. It's difficult for me exactly to pinpoint what drives me at that point. It's quite new work, but it's I think partially has to be done, has to be triggered by 9/11 and the kind of atmosphere after that. That society has been more inward, more frightened, and for me it's a way of fleeing from this kind of these threats, or this kind of atmosphere where people get more and more frightened, can't do this, can't do that. It's also a fascination for violence, I think, in a way. From these attacks, for example, in these twin towers, it's quite gruesome. But also, if you look at it and you see images of this fireball bursting out of the towers, it's got something really beautiful. Also, it's really jewel. And this image, for example, it's derives directly from a building. It's from. I was very fascinated by St. Guy's Hospital in South London, and it's got these really strange extensions on the side of the tower, and you can see that coming back in here. It's almost like a tower of a battleship or aircraft carrier. In the sky. If you look closely, it's yeah. Sorry, how can I go back? Yeah. This derives from camouflage print. I kind of transform these patterns in the sky. So it's also this sort of very lively, but it's also quite dark and threatening atmosphere. It's a cloud, yeah. And this is called Outpost. It's also in the exhibition, of course. I'm playing with two kind of ways of dealing with this sort of flying from society. I kind of, in a very romantic way, try to escape it, and the other way, in a very violent way, attacking it, like this table with this fireball. This one's called Outpost, and it's like a building. I imagine it in a forest being built far away in a nature. It's also a part of my work derives from this image of this Unabomber. He's built this actually really beautiful shed, very simple shed in the Montana mountains. And if you see it, this image, it's really romantic image. You see this beautiful forest and this small hut there, and by knowing this this background of it, it makes it really fascinating. Partially. I partially make sketch, but then I started building it, and then I started changing it a bit, adding elements to it. It's also like this sculpture outside, I made a quite detailed sketch, even in Maya. But during the process, it's always different, and I make changes and decisions, and yeah. Another example. It's a more rough version. My ideal is to make sometimes, someday, really bigger sculptures of these, even pavilions you can use or click on to existing buildings. Well, this is the one you see here. It's also, of course, it's a bar. It's a smoking area, and it's got this violent image of this dome, and it's almost like you're celebrating the violence in a way. You know, like I always give the image of soldiers taking over a village, and they drink and smoke, and they enjoy it. So it's a bit of a playing with that subversive idea. This is an installation I did last summer in Berlin, and it's a sculpture which can also actually be used. The left part is a bar, and inside there was on a big table there was a sculpture made of plaster plates, and people could extend that whatever or however they like. Lectures being held there, DJs performed, and it's my first attempt to really try to get all kinds of functions incorporated in a building. Again, this is really in a safe gallery area. it's a completely other thing than outside, and I realize that. So for me, it's a bit of a test case also. And as I said, I want to in the future I want to develop it more and more, also to do these projects outside. It's a slow process, and I'm not in a hurry, but it's really my aim to do that. Also, I think partially because I think visual arts, that's where I come from. I think it's been really drawn into a position, or pushed into a position, or let it being pushed into a position last 20 years, wherein it's hardly has been relevant anymore. It's other things like architecture, film, and music. They've taken that role over, and I think it's important to sort of try to get relevance back. And that doesn't mean I don't make work for inside of a gallery or inside a museum, but I do think it's important to do these attempts. I'll just show you a small film. It's 5 minutes of the show I did in Berlin about this installation, just to give you an idea of how it was, and works better than images.
klar. Hier zu Stau. Nächstes Mal baut Rob einen Ventilator mit an. Ja.
Yeah, it was very interesting what people came up with evil buildings. One girl, she designed a building, was round, and people can use it, but then through the weight of the people, it started it started moving all the time. So you don't have a sense of, where is up or where is down. And someone else, they made a sort of building which almost like a tunnel, sort of made an escape route from my sculpture, and the other one made from a shoe, with sort of black shoe with needles and threads. So it's very aggressive kind of feature. So yeah, it was interesting to see that. This is my latest project, apart from this one here. It's like it's a public sculpture, temporary sculpture in Newcastle, in Biker. Maybe you've heard about Biker Wall. It was a really ambitious project in the 70s, 60s for housing for people with lower incomes. And at this point, the neighborhood is being affected by unemployment a lot, because shipyards being closed, and it's about 50% is unemployed. And I was asked to make a public sculpture for that neighborhood. I designed a small pavilion. I thought, yeah, I could make a very abstract work there, but I don't think it works there. So I thought I want to make something people can actually use. It's like a pavilion with sort of exploded school board, exploded shrine made of plexiglass, and inside there were seats, and it's like it's made of two parts. You can click around the lamppost and bolt it together, and with spot welding fix it. So you don't need a base or anything, and you can move it to one neighborhood to the other, and that's also what's going to happen there. It's not that rough as my other work, because as a permanent piece you always have to make compromises with, in this case, health and safety. And that's the reality, and people destroy everything in that neighborhood, so I had to make it kind of rigid. But it's still there, and I think people are really using it, and it's not destroyed yet, so for me that's a victory. As soon as the sculpture was there, the kids took over, and they just went all over it. And in the evening, you have just natural lighting for the work. That's it. Does anyone of you have questions or?
Yeah, if anyone's got any questions for Rob, maybe it would be best to ask him in the bar. We're going to go and buy him a drink. Unless anyone has anything pressing they need to say now. No? Great. Well, we'll see you in the bar for a drink.